Minutes for people to get here and online. I'm going to apologize now to the Facebook people that tune in because our camera is a little tilted. I forgot to put this on the charger, and so we're having to do the best we can here. Okay. Well, welcome to Wednesday night Bible class here at the Stevensville Church of Christ. I want to thank you for tuning in. For those of you who are tuning in on YouTube and on Facebook, we're in Hebrews chapter 12 tonight. And if you've been joining us last week and in the weeks before, Hebrews has gone over how the old covenant was merely a shadow of the new covenant we live in through Jesus Christ. And Hebrews 11 that we went over last week and the week before that was talking about faith and exactly what faith is. Chapter 12 tonight, the first section is called Jesus, Founder and Perfecter of Our Faith. So let's get into that. Starting in Hebrews chapter 12 and verse 1. And it says, "Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us." So in this idea of faith that we have found in Hebrews 12. Good evening.
Hi, hey, Bob. Over here. How are you doing?
Well, we just got started. I thought maybe the weather had kept you all in tonight.
Oh, we've been out all day. Pretty much.
Yeah, I've done some running around myself. Got Francis and Thomas tuned in. Good evening, y'all. If y'all are tuned in on Facebook or YouTube, just give a quick hello that we know that you're here. And we'll wait for Bob and Sarah to get settled here. Oh, thank you, Bob. I forgot to adjust the temperature. It's been kind of a busy day for us too.
So many things, hard to remember them all.
Well, they say the mind is the first to go, and I can't remember the second.
Right. Oh, yes. Ooh.
You better be careful. Bob will still them M&Ms.
I like chocolate.
We are in Hebrews chapter 12 and verse 1.
You share your M&Ms, Bob?
Yeah.
Yeah? Well, you can.
As she sits down. So Hebrews chapter 12 and verse 1.
Thank you.
Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who, for the joy that was set before him, endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God.
I just gotta get my card.
You know, if you joined us the last couple of weeks, we went over this topic of faith. And the first verse of chapter 11 describes what faith is so perfectly. And yet it's quite a difficult concept to really grasp. If you really think about it, it is, you almost look at this idea and think, what are they talking about? The assurance of things hoped for and the conviction of things not seen. How can you be convicted of something not seen? And we went over that a couple weeks ago. Our ultimate hope we find in Christ. But I like what chapter 12 is saying. It's referring to our journey in faith and our journey with Christ as a race with endurance. Let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. You know, when I was in the Army, every so often we'd have to do PT test, physical training test. And we had 2 minutes to do as many push-ups as we can. And then we'd have 2 minutes to do as many sit-ups as we can. And the last event was a 2-mile race. And based on your age and your height, you had a certain, or your age and your weight. I think it was age and weight. No, it was age and height. You had a certain amount of time to complete this 2 miles. I had 16 minutes and 32 seconds to complete this 2-mile race. So a lot of guys right at the start would just right off the line as fast as they can go. And they burn out all their energy right at the beginning. Now me, I would start off and I would get to a nice steady pace and I would hold that pace because I knew at that pace I could make my 2 miles in my time. And you would go up a mile, hit the mile, turn around and come back. And there was a certain point that when I could see the finish line, and there was a certain point that I knew, okay, if I give it everything I have from right here to the finish line, I'm going to be under my time. And so I would have people that would just take off from the line like a shot. And 4 or 5 of these people, I would end up passing on the mile back. Well, because they're slowing down and they burn out. And I would just hold one steady pace until I got within, probably an eighth of a mile of the finish line. And then I just gave it everything I had. But I ran that 2 miles at a set pace because I knew that I could endure it and still meet the goal that I wanted to. And looking at this verse 1, I think about that and I look at our walk in Christ, our journey of faith that we're on as Christ followers, as Christians, as God's people. And I've seen a lot of people in my time who on their journey, they accept the gospel, they accept Christ, they're baptized into Christ, and man, they come up out of the water and they're like ministry, 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 and they hit the ground running. They're telling everyone they know about Jesus, and they're just on fire for God, and it's just like they're a shot right out the gate. And then within a short amount of time, they're burned out, they're slowing down. I don't understand why these things are happening to me. And they get into the storms of life. Well, they've burned out all their energy out the gate. And they don't persevere with that endurance that we find and that we're supposed to hold on to in Christ. Verse 2 talks about that. Looking to Jesus, the founder and the perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. Christ had that endurance through the crucifixion. We've seen that at the garden. Before he was arrested, when he was praying, and he said, Father, if it's possible, take this cup from me, but not my will, but your will be done. And at that point, I can only imagine how emotionally and mentally taxed he was. And even my imagination, I don't think it properly really comprehends the feelings of the moment. And 3 times he went in prayer. And then he had his 11 closest friends next to him, and they kept falling asleep. But at any time he could have just said, you know what, I'm calling it quits. I can't endure this. I can't maintain it. And he could have just said no. But he endured to the cross. And then after the cross.
And he really, I don't think he was feeling any joy at that time.
No.
But he was looking forward because he knew the joy that was on the other side.
Mm-hmm. He knew, I got to get through this pain. I got to endure this part of the race. Now, for those who maybe have not done any kind of like endurance running, when you first start running, you start conditioning your body to even run a 2 mile up, mile back. there is a point where through the race, you start getting cramps. Your sides start to hurt. You start breathing a little heavier. And
We did that in PE.
yeah, you do that in PE.
Mhm.
hmm You know, even though I had run this 2 miles, you know, more than a dozen times, there was always at one point, and it was always about the halfway mark on the way back, the half mile back. My breathing would start, man, I'm tired. That my brain would kick in, man, I'm tired. I can't do this. And then you would have to push through mentally. And that's kind of what I envision in relation to running the race where Christ was at. You know, he was saying that prayer, okay, God, I am tired. I am fearful. I do not want to go through what's going to come up. If you can provide me a different road, I'm going to happily take it. But if this is the course I got to maintain, then this is the course I got to maintain. In our own lives, we have to look to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith. He endured so much going to the cross that the things, you know, when life gets heavy and we start seeing the storms in front of us, and it seems like that's all we can see, we got to look to Jesus and see how he endured and model that. And that's where we find that endurance to keep going in our faith.
In high school, we had about 400 people, about the size of Stevensville High. And during the course of the year, the coach would have us play practically every different sport. And one of the things that he included in the spring was cross country. And we started out the track, and then it went downhill across this field. There was a road down at the bottom, which was level. And then the last third is practically all uphill. So you don't get the uphill at the beginning. You got to be uphill all at the end. And I was short. And I remember one of the things we had to do was a broad jump. And you have the takeoff board, then you have 10 feet, and then there's a sand pit. You try to see how far up you can get in the sand pit. When I was a freshman, my goal was to get from the board to the sand pit 10 feet. But on that running, it was, by the time we hit that last third going uphill, that's when I passed, that's when I made past many people.
When I was at Fort Jackson, South Carolina for training. Was training to become a chaplain assistant, AIT, Advanced Individual Training. They had this hill that our drill sergeant, the mighty Ungawa. The mighty Ungawa.
Okay.
I have no idea what that word means, but I imagine it probably means monster or something related to that. And it was a mile up. So there was a cattle gate at the top of this hill. And it was from the bottom of the hill where we'd start up to that cattle gate was 1 mile. Well, then you had all downhill back. And we had to run that within our PT test time. And the first time I ran this, that hill was very tricky because it's up. And as you're going, you see a little plateau and you think, oh, I've reached the top. That's not so bad. That was the halfway marker.
Yeah.
That was the half mile. And then you've seen another, it would plateau for what seemed like maybe 4 or 5 steps and then it's back up. And so I'm seeing the plateau and I'm like, oh, right, I'm making good time. I'm doing better than I thought. I saw that and I went, oh, and my heart just sank. And the thing was, in training, if you didn't make it in your time, you had to run it again. I ran that hill twice, every single time. There was one time I made my time. But I was just so used to running twice that I got down and I started my turnaround time and drill sergeant Morissette like, Wingate. You don't have to do it again. You made your time. You did good. Good job. And I was like, what do you mean I don't have to do it again?
That happened.
And he goes, hey, you made your time, you're good. I'm like, this feels too weird. I'm gonna run it again. Because you just get so much in a habit of running this thing. And he goes, okay, well, hurry up, And so off I went, just because by that time, and that was probably halfway through training, and we ran this thing, I think, about once a week. And I just turned, I said, it feels too weird not to run it twice. He's like, go. So off I went. But I had that endurance built up through, and I'll tell you, the first couple times doing it, man, when they'd say, all right, we're going to go run, everyone was just like, oh. By halfway through the training, we're like, yeah, Manu Gawa, we're going to get this. We were getting pumped up for it because we're building up that endurance. In our faith journey that we're on, in this Christian walk that we're on, we're going to have hills. We're going to have mountains. And we just have to look at that and go, I've got this endurance. If Christ can go to Gethsemane and he can go to Calvary, I can get over this mountain that's standing in my way in this valley that I'm in. And looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross. And like you said, Bob, it wasn't that joy in the moment. It was the joy of, I'm going to go through this pain, this trouble, I'm going to die, but 3 days later, I'm going to come up out of the tomb, and then I'm going to, after I complete the last bit of my mission, I'm going to go up and I'm going to sit the right hand with my Father. That's the joy that he's looking forward to. Just like for us, we're looking for that joy of when this temporary life is over, we have that joy of spending eternity with the Father and with the Son and with all those who have gone before us in faith in heaven.
In the world may see that there are certain rewards for working hard.
Mhm.
Sometimes you get a bonus or you get a promotion. But for the real long term, the world has no joy to look forward to at the end. Can you imagine it when you begin to realize that it's coming to the end and there's what was it all about?
Mhm.
You know, or you just, I guess the world just numbs itself or else turns against against life.
But there's lots of people out there who believe that, well, once you're dead, that's it. You just cease to exist. There's nothing after. And I'm thinking, that is such a sad mindset to have, because then the only thing you have to look forward to is the day to day. And don't get me wrong, I love life. I love how God has blessed me with the family that I have. But I'm looking forward more to that eternal joy and not having to deal with the troubles of this life and not having to deal with the stuff that we're seeing today, or that the things that are going to come tomorrow, or the things that we've seen in the past. Because, I take my joy in knowing that it's all temporary. It's not eternal. And I'm looking forward to that eternal.
And yet, when we understand the concept of the kingdom, we realize that here in this world, there is another level, another universe.
Yep. It's
The
another
world
plane of
knows
existence.
nothing about it. The world can see the nightly news and see all the problems, and there's no other standard.
Mm-hmm.
But for us, we can look at it and we can really get disappointed or disgusted, depending on what's going on. But we know there's a whole other standard, and that's why here's our family, and this is a whole other place of peace, another place of fellowship. No, it's not perfect, but it's a whole lot better than anything that the world offers.
Mm-hmm. I had a discussion some years ago with someone who didn't believe in an afterlife.
Mhm.
And they didn't believe in heaven or hell. And they asked me, they said, well, why are you so convinced that there's something after this life?
Mhm.
And I said, well, I look at it this way. I said, my faith is a part of who I am. It sustains me. I said, now, if I die, or I said, when I die, and if I find out that I was wrong, and there really is no God, there really is no heaven, no hell, I've lost nothing.
Yes.
I said, but think about the reverse. I said, if you die, I said, when you die and you find out that you're wrong, you've lost everything.
No
Uh-huh.
thanks.
I said, I said, now, am I 100% sure that there's an afterlife? That God really is there and that there's a heaven and hell? No. There's a part of me that every now and again doubts. And I said, but I would rather hold on to my faith and be wrong and lose nothing at the end. And, he just brushed it off. Oh, well, that's just foolish thinking. And, and he explained it away. And I just said,
You're explaining
You're-
hope away.
yeah, I said, I would not want to gamble the way you're gambling. And it wasn't anyone that I've stayed in contact with. It was a conversation I had with someone in passing. I don't remember. I know I was in California. I don't remember what the setting was, but I remember the conversation. And I remember thinking to myself, what a sad mindset, And then, there's also, I've learned recently, and by recently I mean within the last 5 or 6 years, that there are people who believe that there's a God and that there's heaven, but they don't believe that the devil is real, that there's hell. And they say it's all like figurative and symbolism. And I'm thinking, are you reading the same Bible that I am?
Today, in a Bible study we had, the individual we were studying with said, did Jesus ever talk about hell? I said, yes. And one of the words he used is the word Gehenna.
Mhm.
And what Gehenna was, outside of Jerusalem, there was this gigantic garbage dump. And it was set on fire to burn all the garbage.
Mhm.
It never stopped burning.
Yep.
And that's the word he used. They called it Gehenna.
Yeah, because it was, you have a large metropolitan city, and all their trash gets taken outside, and they burn it day and night. It's a never-ending fire,
So that way.
and so that's how Christ described what hell is going to be like. I remember, just kind of a side note. You're talking about trash. I remember we were rolling through a town in Iraq, and I was looking out the windows, and I was trying to get pictures as you're bumping up and down the truck with my camera. And I remember looking, and in between these little shack houses, you'd have a space the size of, half an alley for us, and it was just piled from the ground almost all the way up to the top of the house, and nothing but trash. And it was, and I'm just sitting there thinking, remember, what do they do with it when it's all, when they have no more space? Never did find out.
Yeah.
But it's stuck.
Well, let's continue. Otherwise, we'll end up rabbit trailing all night.
Yeah, I had a really nice piece of rabbit trail. Random book.
Verse 3. Consider him who endured from sinners such hostility against himself, so that you may not grow weary or faint-hearted. And again, it's going back to that when we start feeling overwhelmed with the storms of life, and make no mistake, your faith will be tested, to look to the example of Christ to gain your endurance. In your struggle against sin, you have not yet resisted to the point of shedding your blood. And have you forgotten the exhortation that addresses you as sons? My son, do not regard lightly the discipline of the Lord, nor be weary when reproved by him. For the Lord disciplines the one he loves and chastises every son whom he receives. I remember years ago, I was talking about this topic with Chad about, because he asked me, he said, why do bad things happen to Christians? And that spiraled into sometimes God allows things to happen as a form of a discipline to teach us a lesson. And I related it to when you act up or you step out of line, you're disciplined. He said, yeah. I said, does it mean I love you any less? And he goes, no. I said, well, God's the same way. I said, just because he allows things to happen based on our choices, the natural consequences of our actions, doesn't mean he loves us any less. But he loves us enough that just like a good father or a good mother disciplines their child, he allows discipline to come to us by when we choose to do the wrong thing. So when I sin and I suffer the natural consequences of it, it's not because God doesn't love me, but it's a matter of discipline so that the lesson is learned, hey, don't do this again. One of my favorite stories I like to recount is when Chad was about Lydia's age. He touched the stove after I told him several times not to. And after about the third time, he kept trying to put his hand up there and I just let him. And yeah, it was hard. It was a hard thing to do, but I looked at the situation and went, I can tell him 100,000 times it's going to hurt. But until he learns it on his own,
Wait, go on,
he's
Pumpkin.
not going to really learn the lesson. And, now after he touched the stove and he burned himself, and of course I grabbed him up and loved him and ran cold water up underneath his, on his hand to try and chill the burn, and I put aloe vera lotion on it and everything, but he never touched the stove after that.
And you probably learned a little bit more of a lesson of trust on those who give him instruction.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't mean he's going to find out that his parents are perfect and every time they say something, it's going to work out exactly that way.
Yeah.
But the odds are that when they say something, it's done in love, actually for your good and for your protection.
Yeah. And God allows things like that to happen to us. When we say, I know that you're telling me I shouldn't do this, but I want to do it anyway. And God will give us plenty enough opportunity and try and, no, don't do this. A lot of people refer to it as the conscience. I refer to it as the Holy Spirit dwelling within you. When you know you're going to do something and you hear that little voice going, you know better, you shouldn't do this. And you go, I'm going to do it anyway. It'll be okay. And then you suffer the consequences afterwards.
And there's one more thing that you learn if you learn what God says. But because he says sin, doesn't say sin always feels bad immediately. Like stealing.
Mm-hmm.
You may steal something and you have that for a while. So sin has pleasure for a season.
Yep.
But after that season of sin, then you receive the punishment for doing wrong. Sometimes it comes right away. Sometimes it comes much later.
Yep. And and you're absolutely right. There is a appeal to sin to meet your selfish desire of this. Noah has this nice phone, and I've got this phone that's 5 or 6 years old. I could just sneak into his room while he's sleeping and take his phone. This person has something that I want, or there's this thing at the store that I can't afford, so I'll just slide a hand it. Or it may be something bigger than that. But sin does have an appeal to it.
Yeah.
And in the moment, when you think you've gotten away with it, there is that, oh yeah, this was easy. I got this. No one saw me. I got away free and clear. But the thing is, there's always at least 3 witnesses. And they're omnipresent. So, yeah.
You know who Marshall Keeble was?
No.
He was African-American preacher in Churches of Christ. And when he was preaching, I don't know, 30, 40, 50 years, he was one of the most effective ever. Even when we had records, they made a record of Marshall Keeble's speeches. On one of them, he talks about this guy, he knew he wasn't supposed to be getting any alcohol or any drink, So he sneaks down to this liquor store and he's watching real carefully, make sure nobody sees him. He goes in there and he makes that purchase, gets it in his brown bag. Comes out, watches, make sure nobody sees him. Sneaks down the street. First alley he comes to, sneaks down that alley, make sure nobody's watching, takes the bottle out of the bag, and Keeble says, and he looks right up at God as he drinks that.
But that's very true, though. It's funny, and we can laugh at that, but that's very true. Now we don't have to look up to see God because God is omnipresent; He's everywhere. But we associate heaven with being above, and so naturally you look up, and my thought is, "Hi, God," But that's very true. There's like Jonah. There's no place we can hide from God. No matter how far or whatever private room you think you're in where no one else can see you, you're still being watched. And not by the government. Well,
the
probably
good part
by the
is,
government, but
we
not at the moment.
even though we can't see him, we know that Jesus is here too.
Yep.
There are 2 or 3 together.
There I
am. There.
Yep.
So he's always there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I had when I was in youth group, we just a quick side note, our youth minister had a once a month. It was like a radio program that he would record on the tapes, and then all the kids would help participate in it, and they just ship it out to the members of the church, and mostly us youth group kids got a hold of them. But it was called KROS Radio, and it was music that only Christ would listen to, and it was, we had music that wasn't just Christian, but secular music that was positive, uplifting, and it was clean music, and I think about that message, only music that Christ would listen to. And that reminded me when you said, even sitting here, we know that Christ is with us, which is scriptural. But even when we're by ourselves in the car or at home or whatever it is, we have to remember we're never truly alone. Now let's get back on track. And for those of you who are watching online, if you haven't been with us before, you'll find that our Bible studies, we rabbit trail all over the place. And that's just how us Montana people do it. So let's go to verse 7 of Hebrews chapter 12. And continuing on this line of discipline, it is for discipline that you have to endure. God is treating you as sons. For what son is there whom his father does not discipline? If you are left without discipline, in which all have participated, then you are illegitimate children and not sons. So this idea that discipline builds endurance, that it is in a loving way, that it is a way of correction, that it is a way for teaching. I forget where it's at, but spare the rod, spoil the child. It's not saying, hey, your kid gets out of line, grab a rod and beat him, but it's talking about that discipline builds, what's that word that I want? It helps to let a child know their left and right limits. It helps keep them on the path and the way that they should be. Verse 8, if you are left without discipline in which all have participated, then you are illegitimate children and not sons. That's kind of a hard verse to digest a little bit. And it kind of goes back to that verse I was talking about earlier where it says, spare the rod, spoil the child. For years, Michelle has watched other people's children. She was watching children well before her and I even met. And we've had quite a number of kids come through our house. And you can tell the ones whose parents have disciplined them and gave them their left and right limits. And we've had kids come to our house that had very little to no discipline. And sometimes the only discipline and structure they got was when they were at our house. And it did not take them very long to learn that when you're at Mr. Josh and Miss Michelle's house, there are things you can't get away with. Otherwise, you're going to find yourself sitting down while everyone else is playing, or you're going to find yourself in timeout in the corner, staring at the wonders and glories of the corner of the wall and nothing else. And a lot of times, Mr. Josh is going to be behind you to make sure that you're not going like this and playing around in the corner, because that's not what it's for. And the difference in the mannerisms of the children, the ones who came from a home where there was rules and structure and discipline, and the behavior of those who were not, was like night and day. And obviously the ones with little to no discipline were a little bit more taxing on us. And we're like,
Oh, I bet.
where is your mom? It's 5:30.
Our oldest daughter kept 2 children at one time. She was a teenager. She was like 18, 19. And they would bring them to our house, or she would go to their house. And they obeyed her. They really obeyed her. It was 2 different families. There was a lawyer family, and I think the other was a doctor. And they all had these big professional jobs, so they needed their children babysat. Well, Angel didn't hesitate to tell them what to do, and she didn't spank them, but she did
Right.
discipline them. And she got fired
Oh, wow.
because we don't discipline our children like that. And we're going, okay,
That's how it was with us.
okay.
But we didn't get fired, but we would just tell the parents, hey, this happened and you need to deal with it. And if it happens again, then you have to find another sitter, because we don't put up with it.
Good for you.
Yeah.
They left 5-6 months later, more not disciplined, but more respectful, and
Mhm.
they always listened to us and obeyed us.
And the kids.
They tried us every now and then. Oh no, you know where you're at. I don't fly here.
Those 2 kids loved Angel. They loved her. And the parents just made this decision. We're not gonna,
Sad.
so, yeah, it's too bad.
Yeah, I had
Speaking
my
of
parents
hold it like
divorced
this.
when I was 6 years old, and Mom remarried about 3 years later. And she remarried a New England Yankee, I called him, because his whole heritage for 300 years had been Rhode Island. And he was very strict, but he was always fair. And he treated my brother and I like we were his own sons. And we knew he loved us. We didn't always understand him, but he was always fair.
That adequately describes our relationship with the Father, with the Heavenly Father, God. We don't always understand why he does what he does. He always treats us fair, and he counts us, as we've read here, as sons. Now, Michelle and I, we're a blended family. Noah is not bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh, but he is my son. Brianna is the same. I did not help in the creation of them, but she's my daughter. Noah's my son. Chad is Michelle's son. Now, she's not his biological mom, but she has loved him and accepted him as her son. And there's not that distinction in our house of your kids and my kids, but these are our kids. This is our sons, and these are our daughters. God has done the same with us. We are his adopted children that he has just called, you're my son, You're not my adopted son. You're not my stepson. You're not my adopted daughter. You're not my stepdaughter. You are my daughter. You are my son.
Of course, we're Israel, so, I mean, we.
Well, I know you're the favorite.
Bob had to fight for his name, so
Well, every good thing is worth fighting for.
that's the way.
Now, Noah, there's been a lot of things that I have done that in the moment he doesn't understand. Chad, when he was growing up, he wouldn't understand, why can't I go do this thing? But later, after everything is said and done, or as they grow in wisdom, they realize, oh, that's why dad didn't let me do this, or this is why dad didn't give me this. Now, I will admit that Noah has, as far as 14-year-olds go, he has a lot of things that they're not necessity, they're accessories. Because I try and get all my kids things that they want. It's not always possible. But there may come a time, or has been times, where he goes, I want this. Nope, not going to happen. Well, why? All you need to know is it's not going to happen. And I know when I give them answers like that, it drives them crazy.
Uh-huh.
But maybe because there are other things in play that, they don't see yet.
Mhm.
God is that way with us. There are times in my life where I go, God, what are you doing? Help me to see what is the big picture. And the message I always get is just wait. Just wait. And sometimes my prayers, I have had prayers like that. God, what is going on? And that may seem to some like a silly prayer, but that's honestly has been, when I've gone through some big storms in my life and trials, that has been my prayer. God, what is going on? Help me to see. And then I have learned I just have to wait until it's all over. And then I look back and then I see everything as the whole picture. Now, Michelle said something earlier. We were talking about discipline. She said that the kids that we would watch when we give them discipline and structure in the house would respect us more.
Mhm.
We see that in verse 9.
Mhm.
Besides this, we have had earthly fathers who discipline us, and we respected them. Shall we not much more be subject to the Father of spirits and live? And live. So discipline not only is good for correction and for instruction, but it builds respect in the child. Chad recently has come to me, and recently, I mean, within the last year or so, and he's 19, he'll be 20 this coming year, but he's come to me on more than one occasion, and he goes, Dad, he says, I look at all these other people in my age group, he says, and they're just crazy. He's like, thank you for disciplining me and raising me with some common decency, or raising me with, respect. He's like, I didn't always like you when you disciplined me or you corrected me. He says, but I'm starting to understand why. He says, I look at people my age and they're just dumb. Now, don't get me wrong. Chad does his fair share of
Messing up.
non-intelligent things, as we all have in our youth and sometimes in our later adult life. But, for him to recognize that at 19 and go, thank you for disciplining me when I was younger,
Yeah.
as a dad, I'm just like, yes,
Uh-huh.
he understands, But we see this here in Scripture too, that discipline builds respect. We have earthly fathers who discipline us, and we respected them. Shall we not much more be subject to the Father of spirits and live? For they disciplined us for a short time as it seemed best to them, but he disciplines us for our good, that we may share his holiness. Now, a lot of people I have encountered when they are, when things happen. Why is God letting this happen to me? Where's Lydia? Okay, I just didn't see her. They go, why is God letting this happen to me? I'm a good, faithful Christian. Why are these bad things happening to me? Even when they've made choices that have led to their current circumstances. And instead of seeing it for the lesson that it is, they're living in that moment of, well, this isn't fair. That I shouldn't have to go through this as one of God's children, And I've instructed Chad in this same fashion before of, when he does something that's wrong and he gets disciplined for it when he was younger. I used to sit him down, after the initial, what were you thinking? And he'd be all mad because he's in trouble. He has no privileges. He can't go play with his friends. He has no internet connection, whatever it was. And I would sit down and go, okay, so look at your circumstance. Look at the choices you made. What's the lesson to be learned here? And I would talk him through working it out. And sometimes he would just spout things that he'd think I would want to hear. And I'd be like, don't tell me what you think I want to hear. I want you to actually look at this and figure out, what did you do? What went wrong? What's the life lesson? And there were times where he would sit and you could see him really reflecting.
Mm-hmm.
And he'd be like, well, I did this and I know it was wrong. And because of this consequence happened.
And what you're also teaching your child with that is a way of looking at practically every part of life.
Mm-hmm.
Here's the situation. I could do this. If he's trained to start looking at it and say, okay, if I do this, or if I do this, and it's the same thing in any school subject. If I put time into it, what will I get out of it? If I don't put time into it, what happens? Or if I'm given a work assignment by mom or dad, if I put time into it, what does it matter? One of my, from, I don't know, 5th or 6th grade on, it was mow the lawn.
Mm-hmm.
And by the time I was in high school, I found out by learning to mow the lawn, and at least one time I thought I'd done just a fine job. My stepfather came out and said, no, this isn't a good job. You have to do such and such and such and such. And I think we always had an allowance somewhere in there. But by doing that, I found out that then I was acceptable by those in the neighborhood. If they wanted their lawn mowed or if they wanted their gardens weeded, they had asked for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd go over there and I'd have another way to make money. And that ended up being even valuable to me in college after my stepfather died. I knew that at the university they'd have a work board where they'd have postings, and you could go pick a job and go there, and a lot of times it'd be yard work. So I still had another source of income.
Noah, when we lived in Great Falls, wanted to earn some extra money during the summer. And so Michelle helped him and started making posts online that he would come and mow lawns and weed eat and everything. Well, he had one repeat customer. He had to go every 2 weeks.
Mhm.
Well, the first time we went over there, and she had a pretty good sized yard, front and back. So one thing that I taught him was, when you're done with a job, stand back, look it over, see if there's anything you missed. If you think it's good, go get your customer. Hey, I'm done. Come look at the yard. And most people are like, oh, I trust you. I'm sure it's fine. And I told him, you have to insist. No, it's part of this. I want you to come look at it, make sure I did it up to your standards. And I remember one time his customer came out and said, well, there's a spot over here that you missed, and the trimming needs to be redone. And he got flustered after she went back in the house. He's like, I've been here for like 2 hours. I'm like, okay, but you do a job, do it right the first time. Well, he got in that habit of, okay, my job is done. And he would look it over and I'd ask him, I'm like, is it good? He goes, well, what do you think? So it's not my job. Well, then he started looking at it with a more with a more critical eye. And after he would get in that habit, well, then she got to a point where she'd go, is it good? And he's like, yeah, I think it's good. She'd go, okay. She started learning, okay, now he's looking at it on himself. But to bring all this back to text, where is our discipline? As far as our earthly discipline is to teach us a lesson. The discipline that God allows to come into our lives is also to teach us a lesson. When we're going through the storms of life and things are happening that we don't understand, we have to take a step back and go, okay, what's the lesson I can learn out of this? And even after we go through it, sometimes Michelle and I will talk and we'll, okay, what is it God's trying to teach us here? And we have found that gives us an objective sight to see things a little bit more clearly than what most people do. For the moment, all discipline, verse 11, for the moment, all discipline seems painful rather than pleasant, but later it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it. No one likes to be disciplined. No one likes to been told, hey, this isn't right. We naturally, as people, we don't like to be corrected. But correction and discipline will help keep us on the right path. And that's what it's not pleasant in the moment, but it will produce righteousness. We'll learn through constant discipline that, hey, if I do this bad, something bad is going to happen, so let's not do this. It gives us a chance to stop and think, what are the consequences going to be? I tell my kids all the time, your actions have consequences. Good actions produce good consequences. Bad actions produce bad consequences. And I've probably said that so many times they're sick of hearing it, but it's true. Mm-hmm.
Usually you don't think of what's the definition of righteousness. What's the definition? But this comes really close to the definition of righteousness. Then you go back to the Beatitudes.
Matthew
Blessed
5.
are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. It's a real key to the kingdom of heaven. And I know with some of since I'm very aware of events happening in this world, and some of them make me furious, I realize I have to continually go back and discipline myself to realize that the thoughts I'm having are not righteous,
Mm-hmm.
and I want righteousness.
One thing that Michelle will constantly say to me, when I have a moment where I give in to my own frustration and anger, my own fleshly self, is I'll say something out of turn or something that's not very kind-hearted, and she'll look at me and she says, and she'll look at me and she'll go, Joshua, and I know what she's going to say just because she has that wife tone. She goes, Joshua, I look at her, go, what? And she go, is that what a Christian man is supposed to say, or is that how a Christian man is supposed to think?
And you say, that's not fair, Michelle.
And the little kid in me comes out and I
He
go,
grumbles and growls.
no, I sometimes I'll cross my arms like this,
There's a public service ad that's on where this guy comes up to a stop sign and somebody runs in front of him like that. You've probably seen it many times. And he says something, and the little girl in the back says, Daddy, we don't say things like that.
Oh.
And it's so cute. I mean, but it really makes the
Hi,
point.
baby.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But even what you were saying, Josh, we mutually, we enjoy watching Judge Judy.
I can't stand that woman.
And, you know, she never lets it pass if one of the defendants there, if they cross their arms, she stops, uncross your arms.
There's only one attitude here, that's mine.
Right.
That's funny.
Oh. But she really gets to the heart of it sometimes. Well, always, seems like.
You love her or you hate her. We get the same wavelength.
She's no Wapner, I'll tell you that much.
Yes, right.
You know, coming back to this discipline, I like what it says here in the last part of 11, where it says, but later it yields the peaceful fruits of righteousness to those who have been trained by it. You know, we, C.S. Lewis had a quote that, and I'm going to paraphrase it because I don't remember it word for word, but it was something along the lines about experience being some of the cruelest teachers, or experience is one of the cruelest teachers. And this is experience is the cruelest teacher, but boy, do you learn. Something along those lines. And I look at that and I think about this, that, you know, we go through experiences and we make wrong decisions and right decisions. And when we make the wrong decisions, we have to bear the pain of the discipline. But through that training, we then learn how to produce the fruits of righteousness. You know, and it's something that we have to do over and over and over again. When I was in the Army, we trained the same things. You know, we'd have someone that mess up, and you know, we would have to go through the I lost my words. It wasn't training. It was the consequences. That's not the word I want, but it's the word that will fit. You know, we'd have one guy in the unit who would always mess up, and a lot of times he would mess up in the same way, and of course everyone would get punished for it.
Uh-huh.
But after a while, it would start to sink into this one soldier, and then he'd start to do something. We'd all be like, "No,
Right.
no! Think about what you're doing." Oh, yeah. Well, after a while, the same punishment or different punishments come in for the same thing, and it starts to sink in. Just like with us, okay, if I do this and this is my punishment, okay, well, I'm tired of doing this, so I got to change my behavior. You know, and we're trained by it, and after a while, we're going, okay, now I'm not going to do this because this is I'm tired of having to go through this trial and discipline. Well, we will pick up next week in verse 12 and finish out 12 through 17. So when we're disciplined, it's not a bad thing. It's not pleasant in the moment, but later on we'll understand the need for it, and we'll see, okay, this is why I had to be disciplined, because this is the wrong thing. You know, when I was a kid and I would get in trouble and my dad would spank me, he'd always tell me, this is going to hurt you a lot more than it's going to hurt me. And I never understood it until one time I asked him, I said, before you spank me, I said, let me ask you, I said, how is this going to hurt you? Because you're not on the receiving end of the belt.
Uh-huh. And
And he said, when you become a dad, you'll understand.
uh-huh.
And about the time I started to think about what he was saying, whack. But as a parent, the first time I had to discipline my son because he wouldn't listen and he was doing something that was wrong, and I had to discipline him. Oh, it broke my heart. But even going through that, he learned, okay, I can't do this. This is something I can't do. It's wrong, and I get disciplined for it. Later on in life, he starts, he understands through the training that I've given him through loving discipline that, okay, this is right and this is wrong. God is the same way with us. He allows certain things to happen based on our choices. And sometimes he will send us opportunities and test our faith to see, will you continue choosing the right or the wrong? And when we choose wrong, we're disciplined, like a good father disciplines his children. But it's all to build up our endurance and to strengthen us as his children. So
At my age, I'm still learning that where I am in age, if this body is going to do half the things that I would like it to, I have to exercise discipline like I've never exercised before.
yeah. And that's one thing that we have to do too, speaking about discipline, is be disciplined in our behaviors. Not just the discipline of when you do something wrong, but we have to be disciplined within ourselves to, this is what I need to do. And there's lots of times where I have a lot of work I need to get done. And there's part of me that goes, I don't want to do it. I'd rather just go eat, cookies and watch TV all day. But I have to have the discipline to do what is right and what is needed. But we'll pick up next week in verse 12 of Hebrews chapter 12. And thank you all for joining us.
Okay, the next 2 Wednesdays, we won't be here.
Okay.